12 o'clock. Let's call the meeting to order.
Brent, can you hear us okay? Just give us a thumbs up. And Brent has another appointment that he has to get to, but I told him I believe we'd be able to finish up our meeting before he has to leave, so.
Yeah, I gotta probably leave about 1:25 or so, so.
I foresee us being done by that point.
Roll call.
Roll call.
Commissioner Beeler,
Present.
Chair Curry,
Present.
Commissioner Mendel,
Present.
Commissioner Truax, present, Commissioner Wall.
Present. Has everybody had a chance to look at the meetings from February 21st?
Yes.
Yep. Any additions or corrections?
Seems like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And it's still snowing.
Yeah. Don't even start.
It looks good to me. I make a motion to approve. Last motion to approve. We got a second?
I would second that.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And remember, Roger, for next time that I'm supposed to call the vote.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's all right, we'll go with that one, all in favor.
Okay. Aye.
All right, any special presentations?
No presentations today?
Okay. Well, I'd like to welcome Betsy to her first meeting and congratulate her on being fire commissioner. And Chief Billmeyer, you and your staff and the whole department did such a marvelous job through this winter here. I mean, hats off to you. You guys really pulled it off. A couple of those incidences were, really critical. And all of the extra stuff with the propane leaks and whatnot. The community doesn't realize how much you guys do for it. It's really a terrific job. Well done.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I agree.
I really appreciate it.
Appreciate that. We'll cover the consider a little bit here shortly.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting first year. I can't. You just have to echo what you said about our staff. We have an amazing group. And
Yeah.
Every day I'm more amazed. So.
Yeah. Welcome, Roger, and welcome, Betsy. Okay, well, we got no public comment. Consent agenda, anything?
Nothing on the consent agenda.
Okay, so we'll move right to the budget.
So the budget starts on page 8. So just a couple general things on the budget this year. And I have a field draw that we're gonna speak about later, but at this point, we've had 11 out of 13 payrolls, so glide path, we should be sitting at about 84% from that perspective. That being said, we're sitting higher. We're still in good shape relative to everything that's occurring. And I'm also doing some budgeting things that are slightly different from the past in the sense that things like the diff, we had 760,000 on, that's not in here because it's not really general fund things, you go back to capital expenditures. There's things we're not seeing in here, such as we're seeing Chief Bob Brooks is still helping us on quite a few projects, so we're definitely still in kind of a transition period. That being said, this costs ultimately not getting covered by grants. So while the budget doesn't look great, I'd say we're actually in relatively good shape, all things considered. Starting off on the revenue side, we came in stronger than expected on that first apportionment. To see the rest of it for about a month, but very positive on revenues where we are right now. We are seeing less filing miscellaneous fees than we've seen at this point in previous years, which is probably an indicator of a relative slowdown in construction. Essentially, I don't even have a complete stop or anything, but I'd say we could guess that kind of the limelight is right at the peak. We might see,
I think so.
A little slower.
And everything.
Are not helping.
No.
That being said, we had 300 structures that had red or yellow tags of some sort. Most of those are actually in condo complexes, which I think speaks more to the fact that those get turned in by somebody in the sense that you go show up and you don't own it, you're gonna make sure somebody knows about that. And I think we're gonna see a significant amount of damage in single family residences that we haven't seen yet. There's gonna be the recovery phase of this incident is gonna be pretty significant. There was not enough contractors here before this happened, and it's gonna be a concern. Most likely, this is gonna be a FEMA declaration at this point, so there will be some assistance to even homeowners on repairs, and that sort of thing, which is positive. I think the hard thing is just like anytime now, it's hard to find good help, and our window construction is relatively short. So I wouldn't be surprised if we see things come in, that number get higher, mostly kind of from the smaller fixes side. So tons of broken windows, walls pushed in, just a little bit of everything, decks, obviously. So we see quite a bit of that. Other than that, revenues are kind of more expected. We are seeing a little bit more on interest, and that's, we've always been kind of conservative on how that gets put in there. I'll have that bill bump half of that down because we kind of have two separate delay from Monroe County where that interest comes in. At some point, this is something we have some time to take a look at. We have quite a bit of funding that sits in the lake account, about 1.5%. What that means in real terms is that we're losing money sitting there. You don't want to be relatively risk adverse. With that being said, I've spoken with the town at some point, having something at least sitting at the rate of inflation would be positive. It's such a large part of our capital asset plan that you lose 10% on $4 million. That's $400,000. You're saving every dime you can. You end up losing that. So that is something we need to take another look at. From personal costs, like I mentioned, we should be kind of glide path 84%. We're higher than that for multiple reasons. One is we've got a little bit of transition going this year, and everything's not in horrible shape. Extra help ends up being cheap rooks. So long term, we're not going to see that category as high as that. In the past, we've also put seasonal employees under extra help. This year with the wildland program, I'm going to create a new category for wildland. We're not going to have seasonal help, and a big part of that is capturing the costs on wildland. When you look at places like Incline that have a healthy program that they've had up for 15, 20 years, they end up putting in about 10% of the costs come from their general fund. The rest comes from grants and state funding. So ultimately, they're kind of the best practice high mark that you want to hit. But ideally, we're covering a significant amount of those costs through grant funding and through getting experience on incidents. So we should actually start having that be reflected shortly. We were 100% emergency operations for about a month and a half there, where I didn't even get a time card into Carolina. I said, sorry, it's not happening. That being said, we were at risk of losing the grant that Natalie had originally put in for, and we had some concerns when we spoke with CAL FIRE, because it's through CAL FIRE, we still have to follow CEQA. And if you're familiar with CEQA, it's a pretty significant and rigorous process. And the feeling was that asking homeowners to get that done really wasn't going to work for the reimbursement side. So they let us redo the scope of work on that project. We didn't have much time at that point, and we were really a little behind the eight ball. That's a spot where Chief Brooks was able to step in and do it, and actually attribute the majority of the funding for the next 3 years for some equipment. So we're gonna get some wildland equipment, Bobcat, masticator, some CEQA work. So some will be going into the work that needs to happen before we work, and then into our wildland crew. So the funding can't fund us for going out and responding on incidents, but it funds the fuel mitigation work in the community. And that's hopefully going to become that nice balance of where you're going to come in as soon as the snow melts, work on our community. As incidents occur, we were able to pick up that Callaway's Type 6. We had quite a few Callaway's resources here over the last few months. Captain Killer spoke with a couple of them. They're basically out all summer. So if things go right, we have to remember, the whole point of this crew is to start building up that local experience base. We're starting with 6. Ideally, I'd like to see us at, maybe 14, 15 in a few years, and be sending out engines across the state, getting experience, building that goodwill so they come and take care of us when we have our incidents like we saw, over the last few months, and building up that program. So this is just kind of the infancy, but we just blew the job announcements, a couple spots, and we should be seeing 6 people hired seasonal here. So
Chief, do you see that, so from one standpoint, our bidding of seasonal dropping and then being offset by a funded or granted position? So our seasonal, in essence, will go away, even though they're going to be seasonal from a
correct.
funding
And
standpoint.
so there's a couple issues with that. One is there's a little bit of a difference in their mission, in the sense that that's where we have to make sure we're supporting. There's things that, because their fuels mitigation mission is what their grants are paying for, we can't have them doing everything else. So there's some spots we've had some discussions that have to go back to the full-time crew. A lot of that, we still have to work out exactly what it looks like, but if we're doing this right, they're going to be removing trees or helping Santa Barbara fight fires. Right. And that's where we can't look at this from like a 1-year perspective. It's really the 3 to 5 years to try to get that right. You have to balance it out as things come in and things go out. And we may find that we are short on, keeping up with some of the facilities, apparatus, equipment, things here. There are some things happening currently with our full-time and part-time staff, which we've always, my number 1 strategic priority was recruitment and retention. This has been a tough year. We've had, which you haven't had any instance there. So Jordan Lewis accepted a position up in the Bay Area, so we lost him as a full-timer. We are likely to lose another full-timer who's in backgrounds in the next few months. Bringing these 6 people on for the next 7 months will kind of help that out, but it is a slightly different mission. So it's an opportunity for us to reassess kind of what the staff should look like. Again, the intent of them is to be primarily wildlife. That's kind of the strategic push of them. If we do it right, people are working collaboratively and they're taking care of things around the station. We're not just losing that entirely. But we did have some discussions with full-time staff. There's things that, when I was on the aging company, for example, the pump testing got done by us. So it's going to be really hard right now if we have 2 or 3 full-time staff. But we're kind of, Caroline's going to get out there and help us test some of those.
Those testing, yes. Orange Day especially.
Does that answer the? Okay. Couple things, the PERS we actually prepay a lot of, so that's kind of a 2-portion thing there. So that's a little bit higher. One of the things that we did this year, and it was kind of an interesting year. So we've been running about 700-800 calls a year for the last few years. We are at 680 in the end of April, which really speaks one to just the stress on the organization. And these were not simple calls. These were 140 propane calls, I believe, just in kind of March. And those are calls that if you're doing them safely, you're doing them right, you have 3 Asian companies on who cover propane a little bit here some more. But so this district has just been hard as far as providing services. So a little piece of that is that I think we had impeccable timing and incentivizing people to come in on calls, because that's ultimately what saved us. As good as Tyson is, it's hard for him to put out propane incident by himself. So changing that structure up a little bit to keep people coming in has been huge. People also care about their community. That's the side you can't forget. In terms of the pay side, a lot of people do this because they care about people.
What was the percentage of actual need of that 140 calls?
So it's a good question. It's hard to put a perfect number on it. There were 2 that were explosions, both had injuries, so those were obviously.
Yeah.
I would count at least a dozen homes that had propane inside them, to where basically what we ended up doing, you go up John Murray, all you find is a garage. And you have a smell of propane. The problem was you have both false positives and false negatives. And what I mean by that is, sometimes just a tank would break or a line, it would empty the tank, Now you have a smell there for a week. So then you're not sure what's going on. There's other times you find a leak, you're like, oh, I found it. And then you're like, well, let's go dig those out since we're here. There's another leak right there. So I never felt 100% comfortable saying I have solved this problem and I can walk away feeling comfortable.
Yeah.
The ones that were the hardest is we'd show up on homes and you have a significant smell there, but you've been there 3-4 times that week. And you say, you know what, let's force entry into this $4 million home. You break in, it's full of propane. And this thing is completely engulfed in snow. It's now a bomb that's sitting there. And you run this risk where if it had somehow managed to get oversaturated, you could by unsaturating it, you can't get rid of the ignition sources, you can't, because you can't even know where the electrical panels are on the outside. If you could, you'd have to dig 30 feet down to get to it. So you are taking a risk there. And that's been the hardest part for these last few months is we put our people at risk that we could not mitigate. So what we would do is we would try to ventilate those basically passively. So get that open up as much as possible, get some garage doors open if you could manually without pushing anything. And we mask up, still go into an IDOH or immediate life and health environment and try to find breakers to shut things off, which is not ideal, but was the situation. And then we would try to work around the house and find the shutoffs. Sometimes the shutoffs, we were getting a little into another argument, they'd be, what you would find is it would break potentially below the shutoff a lot of times. And then if it's on a tank, if you could find a tank, you could shut that off, that would be the safe way. If it's on the franchise line, there's essentially no good way to shut off. So we had some crimping tools that we got from AmeriGas. And those were some of the tougher calls as well. So one was going into these houses that are full of propane, there's no way to mitigate the risk.
Yeah.
The other one is, I'll give you an example, there was a house at the end of the trails, down the street from former Commissioner Terrell. And usually you would think the trails, less snow, less risk, but everything was dependent on kind of where your snow was in proportion to everything else. What happened in this house is the roof shed took out the windows, also took out the slide. So the house is filling up with propane. We're evacuating that house. We're trying to evacuate all the other houses in that neighborhood. Captain Lucero was on this call with Cal OES, and Cal OES told Gilbert, "You're really good at this. You go in first." We had a broken line. The house was filled with propane, and he was basically what we had to do was shovel that out, and that ended up being another one of those where it had broken below the valve. So then we had to shovel further through, and it's ice, it's not snow now.
Yeah, roof shed ice.
In full, full SCBA, not being able to mitigate the risk of this house still exploding. The only other option on these is to shut the whole neighborhood down, which I would have, honestly, they were considering that at that point, we just didn't get to that quick enough to where they handled this. And work their way down and crimp that line and get that control. And I'd say we had at least 10 of those to some level. That day we had 2. So, it put our, and that's one of the things that really struck me on this incident is there are things that we need to do strategically when I look at recruitment and retention. I look at wildland, and my third strategic priority was propane. What makes propane different is we are putting our people at significant risk. There's risk in everything we do, but this risk level is above where it should be. So we'll get back to hopefully that answers that question.
Yeah.
I wanted to get you a staff report on this. Honestly, we're so short. Just overtime's been high. That's been primarily a function of losing children over this period. I think we'll, there's plans on trying to keep that at a reasonable level over time. Other than that, for the most part, again, expenses. The one other consideration on that, for the volunteer firefighter category, that's the one sitting at 180 with 80,000 budgeted. That's where we were putting those additional costs. But the other thing to remember there is One, it includes our old stipend check, which actually pays for the previous year, and now we're paying it monthly. So we're covering 2 years there. We're covering a big year. So I'm not surprised or concerned about why that's so high. And then the other part of it is we should be able to 94% of this event should be reimbursable. So we're gonna work on reimbursing quite a few of these costs. Chief Brooks is gonna work with Caroline to help work on through that process. Chief Morrow did it a few years ago, and she doesn't want to do another FEMA reimbursement. So, they tend to be a little bit of a pain, but we should, Commissioner Curry and I sat in with the state senator on a meeting a few months back. And, they stressed the fact that we should be getting a lot of those funds reimbursed. So that's our intent. Any questions on personnel costs?
I just had a quick comment for you. Remember, under extra help, we did also put the $4,500 retainer there for Jeff Henson.
Okay, yeah,
That's an
absolutely
extra help.
did, and I think, I'm not sure if that was in one, we mentioned this a couple of times in some meetings, but as we build out this wildlife program, we're starting with a very inexperienced group. We're trying to bring on two stronger, more experienced engine captains, but we're starting a new program. So one of the things that I've done is work with Jeff Henson, who is a retired Forest Service unit, the most expert person in this community on wildland. And he's basically helping us out of the kind of our little ski race together, so you'll see one. But so we brought him on a retainer, and he's helping us ideally with projects like I would like to burn piles in the Valentine, either this spring or this fall. One, from kind of emergency operations it needs to happen, but two, it also starts to set that precedent of kind of what right should look like. And he brings that program down to legitimacy. He's a burn boss to do that appropriately. So an important resource. So both Brooks and Henson are on that. Brooks has a larger portion of that.
Is Brooks still down in Bishop?
Brooks is in Idaho, but we did discuss his contract is basically ending under the terms. He was hired on primarily to help bring Chief Such on, both from the emergency operations side and transferring things like IT, radios, and getting him caught up on all of that. So that contract is essentially ending. We discussed with him having him help as kind of administrative support for this wildland program for 1 year. I'm a big believer that the people that are going to be in this program have to own it long term, but I also want to give them the resources to get started on that and work with grants and that sort of thing. So ideally, Rooks will be working for us probably 8 to 16 hours a week over the summer to help that crew with a lot of the administrative things that have to happen from the grant side. And again, I think the biggest thing is it doesn't get reflected here, but his costs have essentially been covered by the grants. So he ends up being a pretty good resource from that perspective. Moving into admin expenses. So, I think for the rest of the categories, you see some bump just due to inflation, which we expected. I think we were actually pretty conservative on logistics and utility side, so those end up falling in line. We'll have a little bit of a shock absorber, as some of the old chiefs used to say. That being said, there's a couple categories that were higher here. Uniforms and clothing being a big one. We did a couple things. We outfitted everybody with jackets this year, which we haven't done in the past. I still think that long term, it's interesting because you live in your little world, and then somebody comes into it, and you realize that you're not doing things the way that's practiced. But the first thing all the rigs that came in is they asked Cal OES for snow gear, including boots and things that we frankly don't provide for our people. Long term, we need to get there. It's nothing we're going to do within budget, but we need to take care of our people, and I think that's the spot we have to get. So, but the jackets were nice. We've got the turnouts when you're working, but those going to fires, you should be wearing those around the station. So I think the group appreciated that. And the other thing is we had a huge rookie academy where we ended up having to get badges, and just between badges and these name tags, we spent about $10,000. So some of this is cost of doing business that I think long term we should be supporting. The other big one is food. Some of that is internal food costs. There was quite a few times that we ended up paying for basically when you bring in resources in what's called mission tasking, you have to provide all the logistical support. So all the inmate crews we saw here, they would come in, they would stay down in camp. They're a great resource. It's a little different from what we have for hydrants, but they come in and are basically working for us. we have to provide them with food. So we were, a lot of those costs end up coming to us. It's still really important in the big scheme of things to recognize how fortunate we were in this incident. This type of incident, you end up having to absorb the cost, bankrupts districts or communities potentially. Tulare County is in a very difficult position right now with the flooding they have in their community. Even with the FEMA declaration and the 94.5% coverage, it could potentially bankrupt them. So,
Well, I was gonna say, Dan Holler brought this up when we were talking with him, and the difference between pre-staged versus Big Bear, who raised their hands and we need help. 35 million or 53 million? 70 million that they got a bill for. That we didn't get billed for. Because we didn't, they preemptively staged people here versus us raising our hands saying help. So when you holler help, you get to pay for it.
and it's not a great system, and I was emergency operations stressful alone. The politics of playing all this out right is incredibly hard. This incident initially was getting managed by a type 1 team that also didn't get basically delegation of authority from the county because they didn't want to pay for it out of the bishop. And so I was trying to work through that team. We pre-deployed resources here that were not in, we were basically running a very clunky emergency operations for financial reasons where they're pre-deployed. And I couldn't say, there's certain things where they're like, declare an incident, you can start changing. As soon as you declare an incident, guess what? You're paying for that incident. So there were things that were done ultimately right, but they made things clunky and some people will never understand. I think we worked our way through that maze very well as a district. So like I said, we're not 100% out of the woods, but yeah, we've had a proud of staff when we got over the last few months. Sure. So yeah, and again, food is one of those we'll hopefully get reimbursed on. Insurance, we discussed that kind of at the fall. That's could become our expected rate. My personal insurance just doubled after doubling again. So I think that makes another argument for why we have to help stand up our.
Oddly, propane is down.
Yeah. Another discussion. Yeah. And yeah, so good there. The comms radios, we've actually been spending quite a bit, but again, because those are capital expenditures, we haven't been putting them in here. So Chief Walker worked on finishing up our building here, and the expectation is that the state probably this summer or fall will have the repeaters put up. The good news is the county was able to receive that federal earmark for $3 million, and they're going to be paying for all the repeater sites and potentially for some of our handhelds and mobiles, which we had budgeted 300. It also would be closer to 600-700. We're still most likely going to have some chunk of that, but again, it speaks to the value of reaching out to the state, having good partners, and really appreciate the county doing the right thing, honestly, in this situation, paying for our computers as well. Other than that, everything's relatively in line in logistics, and the flip side on prevention is those are kind of two sides of the same coin. So our interwest bills are slightly lower, but relatively in line for the budget there. Training, we have not had the ability to get as many people out to train as we'd like, but we've got some good training coming in for the wildland crew. We actually have Chief Walker's going to be running driver operator in 2 weeks here, with kind of the goal being to the people that apply for this wildland season, we're going to put them through a whole engineer's course. And we're going to let anybody else who wants to tag in on that class sit in. It's tough because it's 2 weeks out of their life. Some people are actually taking 2 weeks of vacation to do it. We still want to figure out another way to get people through the long run if they don't have 2 weeks to do it. So we'll probably go back to some sort of nights and weekends or something like that. But we just had to move quickly, and this was the best way to do it. And we have engine boss and crew boss coming in a few weeks, which will be a portion of our budget. Yeah, I thought we really padded utilities, honestly, and they actually like pretty kind of like where they should be. unfortunately. So, which speaks a little bit to, inflation just hasn't gone away. As you're study macro and all, like we're moving in a relatively good direction. We'll probably be sitting at, somewhere 4%, not 2% for the foreseeable future. And that's something we're gonna have to deal with. So once we get our second portion, I think we'll be sitting in good shape. That being said, the cost of doing business is gonna eat away at that.
Yep.
Any other questions on budget?
So, there's no old business, might as well move on to new business. Consideration of approval resolution 2023-02.
So a couple of things on this item. This is basically our provider is changing, and we've been with FASTS for a long period of time. I actually had Chief Walker and Caroline look at some alternatives. We had a change in our insurance. That being said, we haven't had a ton of time administratively. It essentially looks like it would be a similar quote. And the one kind of negative that Brody's been tying our hands a little bit is it looks like we will be stuck in a 3-year contract potentially on this work period here. That being said, there's no great alternative right now, it's just not our largest party. So we've been actually with Carolina, I think we've been relatively happy with FASTS and kind of what they do for us for that side. So basically what ended up happening is they joined up with FDAC, which we've been a part of for a long time, and we're just signing a new agreement with them. So this resolution is required to stay with those our current services. That being said, I don't have to turn it until July 1st, I believe. Scott and Caroline have some time to find something better. We should do that. I honestly doubt that's going to happen, but we do have a little bit there.
And just for the board clarification, the FDAC EBA, that's our dental, vision, and EAP benefits. So it's different than health. So it's combining into a risk pool the workers' comp along with those particular benefits that are offered to full-time employees.
So we need a motion on this.
We do, correct.
I'll move to adopt resolution 2023-2.
Now second it. Any questions or comments?
My only comment was I saw that thing about the 3 years too, and like, I don't like that so much, but
Yeah.
what do you do?
I don't either.
Yeah,
Apparently it's their new game. They just lock you in. Take it or leave it.
Sure.
yeah. I like contracts that say 30 days and you can get out.
We ready for a vote?
I think so.
Commissioner Beeler, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mandel, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Truax, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Wall, how do you
Aye.
vote? All right, this motion passes. This resolution passes.
Okay, let's move on to B, consideration resolution 2023-03.
So I'm going to zoom this one out a little bit, and then I can get into the details on the side letter. But one of the struggles that the district had for a long time with bringing on the wildland program is figuring out benefits. And the concern was always, once you bring these employees on, there's the cost factor, but if you let them go out on incidents across the state, they're going to quickly max out their hours. And we used to hold all of our part-timers to 970, basically 970 hours. Because after that point, that hits the threshold for PERS, you hit the threshold for healthcare. This is truly a compromise between the district and the association in the sense that if we wanted to get over the hurdle, everybody recognized that we couldn't just give everybody 20,000 towards healthcare and put them on PERS at the same cost. Start saying, so if we wanted to do this, we have to find a way that it was beneficial to the employee as well as to the district. We've had some discussions on the retirement side already, but the healthcare is a significant hurdle to get over. On top of that, we look at something like PERS healthcare costing $20,000. It's not always from somebody who's 25 years old and has some better economic, market solutions that they can look into. They didn't find the value the same as the district found the cost to be. So we try to find a way to kind of work through all those, recognizing that, the potential is pretty high for these people to have the opportunity to work a significant amount of overtime, get out on some fires and make some pretty good money. So it required a couple of things to happen. One was figuring out the PERS retirement. One was figuring out the healthcare. And then one was making sure we had kind of a consensus and good agreement between, we have one association, but there's different factions and different groups that have different needs. Make sure we keep everybody happy and everybody whole. I think the biggest thing to explain to people was, like, if we don't make this happen, we're not cutting into our current pie. There's a whole other pie that we really need to. So we can't figure out how to cut this up. There's no pie. Everybody came to the table. I think we had some really good discussions and we got to a good spot. It is a compromise on everybody's part. So this first piece here is PERS healthcare. What usually happens with safety PERS who are under the federal guidelines is the employee pays 13% and the district pays 13%. What this proposed was, and if you're not in PERS, we have to pay Social Security on you, so we're paying 8%.
I'll just back up. I think you mentioned this is about healthcare. This is about
I'm
retirement.
sorry, retirement, yeah. Thank you. So we're usually paying 8% on the people that don't go over 1,000 hours. So the ask was that the employee picks up 3% of the employer PERS cost. That'll make the district have be responsible for 10%, a 2% increase for the district over the 8% for Social Security. The employee, rather than 13, goes up to 16 now. So there's a larger piece that they have to pick up for all new members, but they get to cross that threshold essentially. So it's something that the group agreed on. Michael and I signed it a few weeks ago, and that is the actual resolution that's going to be today. The other two that have to happen, and my intent is to have this for your next board meeting. I just got the wording through legal. I think we have a agreement on concept and language. It is for healthcare. So what we're going to do for our full-time year-round employees, we keep giving them the same healthcare benefits they have. That's kind of the industry standard, and we keep doing that. For people that apply for these wildland positions, they are going to get, and they actually agreed to slightly less at first, but I do believe that we have a responsibility to them in the sense that they're gonna have to show us that they have some healthcare while they're working for us, which technically don't have to do, but we believe is necessary. And then we're gonna give them $500 a month that they can put towards paying for their own healthcare. So what that does is allows them to go out to the market and find something outside of PERS. Ends up being about $6,000 a year, which doesn't cover all of it, but for a part-time job, it's a good chunk. And again, it lets us get over that threshold. I think that what we're doing this first year is we're setting some precedent, but we've also all recognized that we don't know the best way for some of these things to work out. And sure people will come back and renegotiate, or we'll come back and say we actually need this. And there's the recognition on both sides that this first year is a little bit of a learning curve to see what works well. This I felt provides those employees with something I felt better than. Technically, we could have gone as low as 152, which is the PERS Pentagon minimum. This allows them to kind of, it speaks to the fact that previous boards have always said, healthcare isn't, but we need to make sure that we're trying to go towards that. So it's a step in the right direction. We can reassess. If you decide to come up or down, that makes sense. So what it does allow us to do is get over those thresholds that we couldn't cross before. We have good understanding, I believe, on the third part, which is how we're going to let people go on these incidents. I think it's important that all of our staff becomes better at responding on wildland incidents. So I want to see the wildland staff out there. I want to see our full-time staff out there as well. We need to get to where our chief officers have more experience. These things take years to build, so it's not going to get there right away, but we have enough of a framework on who's going to go and when to make that start to happen. Over time, as people are out, we can start to bring people into backfill them and make sure we're doing that. You don't want to move too quickly. That was one of the things about stress and the decline. Like, you can't just stand up 60 people and expect that, because there's gonna be fluctuation over years, we're make sure we give them appropriately. So this was kind of that minimum mass that I thought we could move this project forward with. I frankly expect it to go over the next 3 to 5 years if we do things right. But I think all the pieces are there to make that happen. So you should see that coming before you next week. I'm sorry, with the next board meeting. The other thing I'll most likely get for you with the next board meeting is, I haven't had a chance to speak with the association on this, but we do need to work through the whole MOU at some point. It's gonna take time. It's difficult because we have people who try to work on meetings remotely and there's quite a bit going on. But I also believe that before the next fiscal year, we should try to get a cost of living adjustment for all firefighters. So something at some appropriate level that we haven't had a chance to sit down on is most likely to come, because the MOU technically ends at the end of June. It's gonna take us a few months to clean that up and get through some things. And at this point, the cost that we're seeing for the district, all our employees are kind of seeing the same thing. So for the actual resolution today, it's only covering the side letter on the PERS retirement, which is the 3% employee pickup of the. And there's a little bit of trust on their side also that all these other things are gonna work out, because basically they're taking the hit on this one.
Sure.
Paying that extra piece.
So do I have a motion to approve resolution 2023-03?
I would make the resolution, I would make the motion to adopt and pass resolution number 2023-03.
Any questions or? Okay, want to call for a vote?
Commissioner Beeler, how do you vote?
Aye.
Chair Curry, how do you vote?
Aye.
Commissioner Mandel, how do you vote? Commissioner Truax, how do you vote? Aye. Commissioner Wall, how do you vote?
Aye.
Okay, resolution 2023-03 carries 5-0.
Next is the update on the response on the propane.
Yeah, so what I'm looking for here is I want to give you kind of an update on what the last few months have looked like, and a little bit of board direction on where the staff should head next as far as how we both mitigate propane and how we look at kind of the bigger picture. I think we painted the picture a little bit of what the district kind of worked through the last few months. In some ways, it speaks to the abilities of this district. I think that's great. We have pushed resources, frankly, to a breaking point where I was concerned, if we'd be able to continue. I think there's two questions in front of us at this point. One is dealing with propane specifically. Should we be doing as a district to address propane? And then the other question is that there's some discussion to be had on this event, certainly puts the fire district in the forefront of everybody's minds. This board has worked for a while on trying to increase revenues so we can do our job appropriately. I have some thoughts on that. I kind of want a little bit more direction on that. So let's start with the first one, which is just propane. This has been a concern for a while. This year, unfortunately, really spelled out why it's a concern. We have a incredibly unique system in Mammoth Lakes, which on top of that is a unique environment. Use the word twice. But what I mean by that is when we have these Cal OES people come in, generally you have a tank, you have a house, and you've got a line that goes to it. When there's a problem at the house, which we discussed, that's kind of where your hazard is. You usually go to the tank, you shut it off, and you've done that safely. You didn't have to go into a hazardous environment to do that. We couldn't find tanks this year, but that's a relatively easy fix compared to some of these other things. You just need a round hole, and that's probably more doable than some of these other things, including things like GIS data, which in the past AmeriGas was unwilling to share. I think that those are the low-hanging fruits, as I call them, that town council we really have to make sure we address appropriately. The tougher one is the franchise system, which runs through about half of town. From days before AmeriGas, when it was Turner, they basically said this is one of two of the most complex systems in the nation. Nobody else has this. And when we're speaking with Cal OES, they were explaining to the chiefs like, no, you don't understand. This is like a water distribution system for propane. The problem is a water distribution, water generally doesn't explode. You can have some issues with it. But there's actually quite a bit of regulation of safety systems in water. If I have a water leak, I can usually shut it off in my house. If I can't, I can shut it off at the lateral at the street going into the house. Unfortunately, because this system is so unique here, it got built outside a lot of that kind of thought process. And frankly, AmeriGas runs a lot of things without even telling the town about it. So we do have to take a look at that and where that should go. There's a couple of considerations. One is, this is most likely happening with or without our permission anyways, in the sense that there were 2 significant explosions here, and the state fire marshal's office came in. We don't have qualified personnel to do the investigation, so I asked to have the state fire marshal come in and do those investigations. Most likely that's going to bump from one part of Cal OES and the state fire marshals across, and even, you know, I spoke to Chief Adams, they're like, oh no, they're aware that there's a problem here and this needs to be worked on. So it may be occurring at the state level anyways. There's something to be said for Mammoth is incredibly unique in some ways, and you know, we should work on some solutions on fixing this locally. So, you know, some level of working with the town to figure out how to do this right moving forward. I'm a strong believer that there's things we have to fix long term. Those would be harder on things that got built in the 80s and 90s and that sort of thing. But we have a responsibility when we recognize that there is clearly a problem, that anything else that moves into the ground and gets built moving forward isn't done in the same manner. So for me, those are kind of 2 separate issues. I think we need to move relatively quickly on one to make sure that things done moving forward are done properly, because that's the easier one, honestly. But then we also started working on, okay, how do we address these things that got built over the last 40 years? The district just does not have the staff capacity to be handling this on our own. So probably the 2 different directions we can go with this is to try to work with the town on it, keep it kind of a local issue, or work with the state and try to get some state regulations that bump across, which may again happen anyways. I started receiving phone calls from a whole bunch of chiefs as soon as like Arrowhead started exploding, because like, what is going on? Like, I know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, that was one of the reasons that we brought in that urban search and rescue team pre-deployed, because I had an expectation we were moving into something similar to what we saw in 16, 17. But I'm looking for a little bit of board direction. If you'd like to try to tackle this locally or try to go to the state as far as.
Chief, I have a question. So we aren't going to get a say whether the state mandates something or not. They're either going to do it or they're not. And it appears that they're taking, I mean, their activity level seems like, whether they do anything about it or not, but they're engaged. To me, it would seem an opportunity to kind of work in the town and say, look, you know, we can either get a solution mandated to us, or we can come up with a solution that's going to fit us the best. And then say, you know, we're already working on this. Here's what we're going to do. It seemed to me that if I were the town, I'd want that option to define my future, as opposed to let someone else define.
I would agree that, you know, usually local individuals understand local situations best, and I think it would be in everybody's interest to be part of building that solution. At that point, this has been, you know, this is a tough one with the town, because they don't own the franchise line per se, but they have a vested interest in the franchise line and the current system. The fire district on the other side owns the liability, so there is a disconnect there. So you know, that's one where I would look for some kind of board support if this is a direction we want to go, to reach out to the town.
What about AmeriGas?
So AmeriGas, that's a great question.
I mean, I know, as painful as this question is, but
Here's my
it's
concern.
not as painful as the answer.
The concern is AmeriGas, they've done this for years. We've all tried to work with them, you got all up to the corporates. And they try to delay, and work the attorney route for as long as they can. To where we have very little ability to move them forward. There are a couple of things we can do, but most likely you're gonna have through regulation. The other difficult thing, which is not so much a public safety issue, but it is a problem, is the sense that we've essentially created a monopoly. I mean, one of the discussions at the time was, there really should be some discussions with the Public Utilities Commission, because what you've done now is you have one company who, they're there for profit, that's their job, is going to do that, and now we excluded anybody else from easily providing, created, barriers to entry for anybody else to come and provide services. So AmeriGas is going to be a reluctant participant. I would not call them a partner in this process. It will most likely have to happen with regulation, and even now they're testing us every single day, in the sense that we finally had the town work on a permitting process when things break, because you break up plumbing line, you're supposed to get a permit on that. That helps us track everything that's occurring. They're not used to doing that, and they just never told anybody what was occurring, they just fixed it. So AmeriGas, I think, will be led to the water as far as a solution goes there. I don't expect them to come in and bring new solutions to us.
Aren't they up for renewal?
The franchise line, I believe, is up for renewal. I think that, which goes back to, I'm not opposed to a franchise system, it just has to be done properly.
Right.
That's really where I believe that the right partners for that would be the town, if they're, going to be able to take those steps. And, this may be an opportunity to look at kind of the bigger picture, maybe occurring without our permission, as I was saying. So it may make sense to try to be part of that conversation, as opposed to having it come down and have it not make any sense, because they didn't really consider that the same way. The bigger the press line had more exposure. And that was primarily due to the fact that we saw this in the late 90s. There was actually some fatalities in town, and we made some significant code changes. If you look at some of these lines that have broken, you'll be amazed. I mean, these are, 4x12s. They're surrounding this thing, and they're being snapped. So Mammoth has done some things right. It's just, we now crossed that next threshold where this is, okay, well, this is now our new norm, and this is what we have to build these things to. So,
Well, I think it's like John said, we should work on this from our standpoint. If we wait for the state, they're gonna be late in coming to the table, and there's gonna be all kinds of stuff. It'd be years before they come up with something where we can go ahead and help solve the problem here. And if they come out with something that's more restrictive than what we've put in place, we can go ahead and change it. I think it's important that we get on this right away.
Up until these incidents, though, it seems to me that the word propane was a four-letter word for the town. I mean, they didn't really want to even talk about it.
yeah, and I would again kind of echo what I said earlier, which is currently propane it's an asset for the city, and for the district, it's a liability. So we are in a politically tough situation where there is not a problem on their side. There is a little bit now from the political side. There's quite a few things that are happening. It is on people's radar, but that problem's always existed from most of the public safety perspective. It's just now it's visible. So from an incentives perspective, there's a lot of parties that if this goes away quietly, that's probably a good thing, with the exception of the fire district. I mean, we will be in this situation again, and I don't feel responsible for what happened this time. When it happens in 3 years, I will feel like I should have done more, or I did. So that's where I feel like we have a vested interest, but we also have to bring everybody else with us and make sure that they also feel like they have a vested interest in the solution, that and ultimately, it's gonna come from one of two things. It will be a local solution, which the district does not have the staff capacity. If we had 3 people sitting here that could work on this and write up the regulations, do this, great, we would tackle that. There'd probably still be some political pushback potentially, depending on what that implied from a building perspective. But we just don't have the capacity. The capacity really lies in the town if you're living locally. So it has to be in their interest to do it as well. And then recognizing the state will either, like you said, supersede anything we do, or we have an opportunity to help push that in the right direction. I did have a discussion with Hayes from Public Works. He was really interested in making sure that the state does move in the right direction. I don't control town staff, and there hasn't been much discussion since he and I spoke, so it doesn't seem like it's a strategic priority for them right now. That could be just, there's a lot going on. I
How
guess
can the
that's-
board help?
What would be helpful from the board is if I had, like a member or two go time with the town, most likely the town manager, and kind of express what the situation means for the district. And say, look, we kind of have 2 options here. We can help build this, we can sit down with the state and try to do what looks right for everybody, or we can wait passively for the state to push something onto us. But make them recognize that it is a strategic priority for this community when you don't look at it from a town or district perspective. So that would be helpful, is having a board member reach out to the town manager and making it a priority for them as it is a priority for us. And then our staff can time with their staff, and actually cross those administrative hurdles.
I think the timing is really good on this. I think whether it's a strategic priority for the town and town staff or not, I think for the community it is right now. I think, and I agree with you, I don't think we can wait. I also really appreciate you bifurcating this into what can we do looking at, new construction as that comes online. I think that's gonna be a much easier approach than what do we do about these 30, 40-year-old, like how are we gonna address that? So I like the idea of, reaching out to the town. I think, I think we have a really good opportunity and good timing, and I think it's fine to get ahead of the state. The state often doesn't take into consideration the, communities like ours, or not what most of the state looks like. So I think if we can lead them in a direction, that's helpful.
So I guess on that part of that, of course, if there's a board member that's has time to go sit down and give Dan or a call, hey, this is a priority. And it's not that they don't, the town doesn't, they're gonna be overwhelmed. That's basically, we just spoke on the recovery effort, and everything's gonna have to happen with construction. They're trying to patch holes, I don't know if you saw it right now, but it turns out you can't patch holes in this weather.
They're grinding commerce down, like Sierra Manor, the ground.
They had a truck with 40-pound bags doing it with a propane torch up on Kelly too, so they're doing whatever they can.
And they're gonna be hearing from a whole bunch of different types of constituents. I think what I'm asking is that we just make sure that they're aware that this needs to stay a priority, not out of any kind of malintent on their side, just like I said, they're gonna be short, and kind of the squeaky wheel is most likely to get some attention.
Well, they're fighting alligators, but we need to talk to them about draining the swamp. And that's the real issue. They're filling potholes and trying to keep the noise down from people breaking wheels and everything else. And that's all good, that has to be done, but there's a longer term issue here that says you want to go through this again where you have 140 or 114 calls and,
No, make no mistake, we did things well, and we did things right, but we also had luck on our side. That's just the fact that we had an explosion with 5 people inside of it, and they all lived. There was an injury on the other explosion as well. I do not want to replay this in 3 years with the same set of factors. If there's things that are within our control, then we have a responsibility to move forward, especially on the ones, when that house gets rebuilt on Juniper and will be rebuilt, we need to make sure it's built properly.
well, and I mean, think about the context, had it been a holiday weekend, had it been over Christmas and New Year's or
During the day.
during the day, or whatever, or in the middle, occupied.
And the ones that really concern me are, we had the explosion a few years back on Majestic Pines, we lost the homes. It's the second homeowner who hasn't had a chance to keep out. There's no way trying to the politics of primary, secondary homeowners, but we had quite a few. One that I'll mention the name, Dina Castor's family. They're in my neighborhood. I know them well. They have a daughter that's close to my daughter's age. The house next to them was completely filled with propane. The basement below, it's amazing. That had to be a 1,500 square foot basement. And if that house had exploded in the middle of the night and taken out a portion of their house, those are tough. So
I'm curious, that one on Juniper, did that blow stuff onto the slope where they hit
it
guys
hits,
on the?
yeah, if it had been during the day, absolutely.
Yeah.
The roof of that house flew over Eagles, the Run Eagles landing, a hotel, and landed on the other side. It blew out windows in the hotel, which is 300 yards away. I mean, that one again, we had a little bit of luck there since that house was basically kind of dampened by snow. There was a house next to it on one side, the other side there was a little bit of lot there in between. And it just blew out the easiest path of least resistance, which was down valley towards the hotel. But again, potential for much worse. This spring was there.
So I have pretty good relationships in the town. I know the town staff well, as a township have for 10 years. I know Dan well, I know Paige well. I'm happy to speak to them. And do you think this is, one of the things that's gonna happen is Dan has set February 29th as his retirement date, 2024. So is this going to Dan to get him to direct staff like Hayes to tackle this, or should we be talking more directly to Hayes or other department heads?
I think it's the first in the sense that even though he's leaving in February, there's a lot of things that can't wait until February.
Yeah.
I ultimately think this will take, there's some things that should happen this summer, but a lot of this will take longer to where just going through the proper hoops of tying in with Dan's, it was a strategic priority for the district, and then most likely having Hayes work on it would be the proper way. And I can sit down with you and kind of get into more detail on kind of what this looks like.
Yeah, because I'm happy to speak to them, and I know Dan's list of projects to accomplish before he retires is growing rapidly.
Yes, and that's the difficulty.
My dear.
Yeah.
So, and he actually extended, he was supposed to return in October, now he's staying through till February. If I was in his shoes, I'd want to clean everything up really quick, and so we are in a different position strategically right now. So I do believe that ultimately it'll fall on staff to solve this problem. I think strategic direction from their town managers. And then the second part of this is a little bit of discussion on, strategically, where does the district go on the revenue side? If we believe we're under-resourced, I believe that all the previous boards have mentioned that that's an issue. When I was going through the hiring process, the direction I was given is, I believe we should probably do something at some point in the future, or we want to take a little break. We had 2 measures that did not pass. This ultimately brought up the question of, do you attempt to move quickly in a situation like this where you have attention of the community? There's pros and cons to that. I did discuss this with a firm that helped Truckee pass a measure this last summer. They passed the measure, I believe it was $163 or $159 for fuels mitigation. And they had some good points. I think the most important thing is, as much as we are currently in everybody's attention, I think we need to hold on to that. But if we move too quickly, we don't do this right, then we'll set ourselves up for a third failure. We certainly don't want to have 3 strikes. I think there's quite a bit of work that still needs to happen in figuring out what it is we think the district would benefit from the most. There's quite a few different ways that we can approach our revenue needs from. There's some incremental things, there's going for something larger. That being said, the one thing that this group stressed is, even if we're going out for November of 2024, which would be one option, would be a ballot measure. We should start having those discussions now on what that looks like and what that requires. So we did take an opportunity here I still believe that this community doesn't have a good understanding of what it has and what it does not have in a fire district. And I've had people drive, like, look outside, we have a great building that is both a strength and a weakness in the sense that people think we're doing fantastic. The building is fantastic. Our staffing could use a little bit of work. So I believe we still have a story we need to tell. I believe we also still need to know what exactly are we trying to accomplish with this funding. I think that that's one that has to be very well defined. We have to have the support of the firefighters. If we don't have the support of our internal people, don't trust that I'm gonna put this money appropriately to work, or the board, then it's not gonna pass. I know we got really close. As much as I'd love to move quickly, I think that moving intentionally is more important at this point. We should still make sure that people don't forget about this. We have two commissioners that actually asked to sit in with Chief Adams. It's great to hear from your fire chief, but it's always great to hear it from an experienced Calaveras chief who also worked in Orange County to go in and go, wow, you guys are really short here on the public safety side. Like, it's amazing, like, what this community has decided to
And
do.
they were able to say that in front of the mayor and the town manager. So it's not something that's, a second or third hand sort of comment. They were very complimentary of how much we are able to do with how little we have. That said, they were pretty much appalled at how little we have based on where we are. Now, it comes from Carlsbad, where he said we have these side communities and they're funded up property tax, and it's a totally different deal. But
we have a unique situation here, which is going to require a unique answer. I mean, I think it is important to remind the town every once in a while. Their budget is 70% TOT based. We don't get anything from TOT, but we deal with a lot of the impacts of TOT. So one of the things I'm doing this right is bringing all the stakeholders along with us on any kind of measure that we move forward. And that's where there is an opportunity here, but I think it's still kind of a longer opportunity as opposed to trying to put something on we could go out for a benefit assessment next month, but rushing it would most likely not be the proper direction. The one other thing that I did look into, and I'll have this group assess a little bit, is you want to tie costs to impacts in the sense that clearly propane has been a huge impact on the district. For a propane response, we need 3 engines. And just to think about everything that's occurring, while we had that explosion at Valdez there was also a child choking at the middle school, and the medics were on that. So we also dealt with that at the same time. Because propane is stretching us so thin, it may make sense to consider something like a utility tax. That's something that we would potentially have to work with the town on, because I'm still looking into the legal implications of this. There's a possibility that only counties and towns can do utility tax, but the public may be more receptive to a 2-3% tax on propane that goes to handle the response mitigation for it, because it is, as opposed to going out for a $80 ballot measure, whatever that is, and it may actually bring in more revenue. So those are things that if we do them right, unfortunately you have to bring the posters, you have to do all these things. But for me, I'm a big believer that, like I said, that's the impact. That's causing a lot of the work on the district.
yeah, I wouldn't rule out that as an additional piece. I think there's a fundamental operating thing, because you're getting to a point where, I'll get the dates wrong, in California by 2030 you can't buy a gas heater, and you're and then if yours fails you can't replace it, and you're gonna have to go electric and everything else. So you're almost like a self-declining tax. I think that might be a good way to get AmeriGas's attention. In terms of, okay, there's a tax if you don't have these 5 things, like a coordinated shut off. But I think the other piece that was sort of surprising to me, because we made the comment in the meeting that it was surprising when we did the last 2 measures that nobody from the town openly stood up on the council and said, I support this and we got to do this. And Mayor Wentworth, kind of immediately jumped in and said, well, that's not true. I was, 100%. I said, well, it was lost on everybody because no one got it. Everybody was like, oh, this is, politically, no one wants to jump on the bandwagon. He did say, he said, well, I passed several measures like this, and I commit to you that if we want to do it in 2024, Betsy was there, I will help you, get this passed, which is great. Well, what do we do between now and 2024? Right, or 2025, when you actually start seeing the benefits of some assessment. So I think there's a couple of pieces to this that say, we look at something, utility tax might be it, another measure, however that, whether it's property tax or some other way to do it. I think we kind of got to pull the stops out, but I think it's increasingly important that we understand what it is that we need and what's that going to cost, because otherwise it's just like, well, raise my allowance. Well, why? Well, you should raise my allowance because everything's more expensive. Well, what are you going to do with it? Right? And so we do need to have a clear vision of how the community is going to benefit from it.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think I have two important jobs. One is I have to help provide that clear vision, tell that story. The other part of it is, regardless of if I work for the district, I am the town's fire chief. I have to have a presence on town council. I sat through TV the other day, even though it didn't involve me, because I do need to become a familiar face at town council. Start doing presentations. So the first step is, what do you have, what do you not have as a fire district? And that's where it was great having someone from the outside tell John Wentworth, hey, those are some good people you have there, but they are under resourced.
You need 3 times as many, or whatever. And this is the same reason that we Chief Freeball and yourself is this sort of constant drip feed of here's what we can do and here's what we can't do. So just so this isn't Hollywood where when your poodle's caught in a storm sewer, 3 engines and 2 ambulances show up, right, with 50 people. We're not that resourced. And by the way, Station 2 is empty. And so I do think that sort of constant reminder of what our capabilities are.
Yeah, and in no way fear mongering, but go out there and drawing a realistic picture so that people have expectations.
But don't be overconfident in the fact that no matter what happens, a propane explosion, a small wildfire, and a kid choking at Mammoth Middle School, we got a problem.
And I think the other part of it is getting the community to realize just what a value the district currently is. And, to the point where it may be worth getting an RFP from someone like CAL FIRE for what it would cost to provide service. But I can tell you right now, it would probably be closer to $12 million.
Well, and the other point that he made was, he said, you are probably adequately staffed for a town of 7,000 people. So the problem is you're a town of 40,000 people.
Mhm.
He said, and that's what you have to staff with. He said, because you can't just have more people on the days when you have 30,000 of your closest friends up here. Doesn't work. And they're right.
Well, I don't think it's fear mongering to put it out. What happens if we have a major fire going through here? This town dies. That's what happens. Nobody's going to come up scanning and burnt trees and that.
Well, what happened to I'll get the year wrong, but the year we had 1,000 earthquakes, many little earthquakes. It wasn't a great ski season, even though we had great snow. Because everyone was like, well, shit, I'm not going up there.
Yeah.
And that's something that's fear.
Right. The mountain dies, the town dies. And property values, you hit them where it hurts. Your property values are going to just plummet with it. And they have to understand that. And just like John says, we got Station 2, there's nobody there. That's where the fire is going to come through. And, you can only do so much when you got 3, 5 guys going to a big incident. It's, you've got a lot of great equipment. You've got to have more men.
So on that one, I think, like I said, I wanted to bring it to the board because I believe there was a question of do we need to try to act immediately. My recommendation, I think we still need to be strategic about it. There are incremental things that we need to be doing. One is the municipal services review that I was working on before this could potentially bring us 7% of our budget due to the URAP flip. So there are things that we'll work on. Right now, kind of 2024 probably seems like a realistic kind of timeline, and then figuring out what is the best way to tell our story. There's a little bit still to be said for, building out on Waukee and making that part of this. People understand. You have your waiter living in Long Valley or Bishop, and your firefighters have to live in town. If this is the type of model that you want to provide services with, and if it's not, if you want to just have 15 full-time paid firefighters times 3 battalions, it's going to cost you, significantly more than what we're discussing. We're asking for, I believe the last measure was about $780,000. When you look at something like Cal Fire coming in, I'm fairly committed the answer will be around $10 to $12 million for the services. So getting them to understand again what they have and what they don't have. So I'll work on that. I'll make this kind of a standing item on the agenda, but I'll keep the board regularly updated on that.
Well, I think your approach is right, not to do something immediately, but to really research this thing, decide what we want to do and how we want to present it.
As far as keeping the conversation alive, I would ask everybody to maybe think about a way that over the next year and a half, whatever, that periodically we have sort of some way to bring this to the public to remind, whether it's propane mitigation, fuels mitigation, propane safety going next winter, or something else to keep at least the messaging alive in some public way. Town council is great, but I don't know about you guys, but I don't set my alarm at 4 o'clock on Wednesdays to tune into town council. So there's got to be some other way that we can keep that alive and that conversation alive as we go forward.
Absolutely. There's again some incredibly low hanging fruits in the sense that, one example is the reflectors on your house. It's in everybody's best interest to have that reflector because it's where your propane tank is, and it just needs to be up higher.
So
But so, yeah, we had quite a few
You gotta have an extension
painted
cord.
over. So it's not going to solve the whole problem. It'll help. And that's one where we just don't have the staff capacity. Carolina is great with Facebook, where we just don't have town has essentially a PIO team, in the county to where we can come with the ideas and then they need to help support and
Repost all of our stuff.
The other part of it is AmeriGas has information on where all the tanks are. They just don't want to share it. The town has a lot more because of the franchise agreements, leverage to get them to share that GIS data so that we at least know where to start.
That ought to be a cost of entry for doing business.
I
mean, any more than you bury water lines and not know where they are, and I'm sure there's some of that. But that's just ridiculous.
It is, but it also speaks to the fact that, Chief Friedel put a significant amount of work into this, and those were hurdles we could not, it speaks to AmeriGas's culture and kind of where they were approaching this from. So that's where I'm looking for a little bit of that support, because it's gonna be a tough guidance.
Okay, should we move on to radio system update?
So, just to catch you guys back up a little bit, these are 2 loaner radios that we have. The Kenwood is from Monroe County. This is what they're considering and purchasing. So they're a little fast around. And this is a loaner Chris radio from the state. So this is the California Radio Interoperability System. You see these are P25 radios, so they work on this newer style where it's basically all digital. So it's not really an analog radio anymore. You go to a repeater, you go to a tower. So it functions much more like a cell phone radio.
So the Kenwood's not capable of doing
It's a P25 as well.
Okay.
But so I just wanted to bring you some examples so you can kind of see what we're looking at. They're very similar to what we already have, but just the digital technology is pretty radically different. So Chief Meyer brought this up earlier. The county received their 3 million, or is in the process of receiving that. They agreed to purchase 5 sites to go ahead and install it. So it was, had $200,000 for Antelope Valley fire improvements. And then the 5 sites across was Lincoln, Station 1, Benton, and then the other ones in Antelope, Colville.
The beauty of this is the state's already building out its own 5 or 6 sites. So it's again, we're not trying to build a whole county system. We're taking an existing state system, supplementing it a little bit, getting some federal funding to where again, it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn good. These are probably we were looking at 4, these 2 as well as Harris and BK. Probably end up with one of these 2 radios. It'll come down to the bidding process.
Didn't we have a problem with the robustness?
Your firefighter groups. That's
We had antenna problems. There were some issues.
We've had.
I'm good at taking
problems
that
with-
apart.
you know, we've had antenna problems on the handhelds. We've had, and that's, you know, the part of the problem is, again, there's a whole bunch of problems with the current communication system. We're clearly not gonna fix dispatch when we fix this. So we'll hopefully end up with some good handhelds that are reasonably priced, that have some reasonable antennas.
Roger.
They're Roger and. That's right.
Take it hard 3 times. That's right.
It could have been full.
But yeah, you know, I think the important thing is for everyone to recognize this is the best solution. It's not the perfect solution if we have. But when federal engineering came in, they had a $20 million solution that goes through county. This is a nice compromise. And we will absolutely have our firefighters do the exact same thing. Try to
I'll break it right now.
Yes.
Put together what Roger took apart here.
It's Gilbert's job.
A question on the other one, the Kenworth, it has an adapter so you can have a microphone on. Sure.
And they all now have Bluetooth, which all the duty chiefs are excited about because we can blow our snow while we're listening. So, the newer radios really should be better, should be crisper, and they should do the job. The one kind of negative to a Trump system, but this isn't unique to us, it's to everybody, is ultimately the feds are the last to move on anything. And so on the wildland fire side, we're still gonna have some old radios, we're gonna clone over and use, and that's pretty standard business. You have a radio system that you use in your district for 98% of what you do. When you go on a wildland site, you bring a different radio that the whole federal world uses. We're not gonna need a ton of those. You can get them for about $1,000 radio now. What you don't want is that to be leading that whole conversation. So it's not ideal, but it's reality.
So the county is expecting to receive best and final offer on radio pricing from Motorola and Kenwood this week. And they want to go basically make decisions by the end of the month on how much we're going to purchase.
And you're ambivalent on which?
There's pros and cons to both. So a couple of things. One is,
Well, my question is, I don't need to know the details. I just want the county to know which one you prefer. I mean, if it comes down to a $50 difference, would you pay the $50 difference to get a different rate?
Currently, that Motorola is about 3,000 and that Kenwood is 1,800.
Oh.
so if they get closer, yeah.
There's, depends on that. final price.
The pros to the Motorola is that the repeaters are Motorola, and then you're working on a complete Motorola system. That is, you are aware of anything you build, you stick with the same manufacturer. There's certain things that just work there, right? So that'll be the pro. Kenwood, the county is most likely going to go to Kenwood, and then the thing is like, do you run 2 different radios? There's some benefits. Everybody moves to the same thing, and then you just have to balance it. But the good news is now we're talking, $1 here, $1 there.
In 72, I had a Kenwood stereo receiver, it was really good.
I don't think we'll go around with one of these. So,
What is the state doing for the Peter bill?
all the repeaters are going to be Motorola.
Yeah,
So
that's
all
what they
that,
are.
that whole, the core, and the good news is we don't touch that. At this point, basically, we're responsible for the handhelds and mobiles, the ones inside the rigs. The repeaters are completely handled by the state. And there's nobody local that has the capacity to do that. There is now such a blend between the radio tech side and the IT side that you need these multi-talented people. They're just not easy to come by that can do both. So having these state tax built in is the way to go.
So if I'm hearing right, are we going to piggyback on to whatever the county is doing as far as purchasing, or are we being separate from the county with the exception of giving the county our recommendation?
So the county's going to spend, they received that 3 million earmark. Of that, 1.3 million is going to be spent on the sites. 200,000 is going to a site improvement at Emerald Valley. 1.5 million is left over for radios. And that's 1.7 all inclusive, including town mountain lights. So predominantly, yes, we're going to go with what they're going to do because they're going to be buying our handhelds, our mobiles. All that.
That being said, we've got some negotiation space to where if we really felt like Motorola was the better radio, then Kenwood could go there. Right now, I have a hard time justifying. I don't see.
Twice the price.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So,
And how many radios would we be needing approximately?
Currently, it's about 55 handhelds and then 30 of remotes.
the mobiles are the rigs.
Right.
And those are about $10,000 a piece. They're more expensive. Some of our command vehicles have 2 of those in there. So it's a large purchase, and that's where having those.
Chunk of dough.
Yeah, the Peter side alone is gonna be about $250,000, and having that taken care of is huge. That being said, I do believe that the county has traditionally provided communication services. Other districts have provided aid for all the unincorporated areas. So when there's a car accident on the highway, ultimately the county should be responding up now with firefighters. We were on one yesterday, so there is a mutual aid system. This is one of the things that traditionally historically been provided in the past.
Alice, not to interrupt, I've got to go take off to the other meeting, so I guess if you had any questions that develop between now and then, just let me know. And we'll see you on the next meeting. And I'll talk to you, I'll circle back with you on some of those options on the funding.
Do all the illegal stuff while you're out.
All right, I appreciate that. All right, thanks, guys.
Okay, Chief Walker, you've got some update on the tent of
You turn into an ice rink and
Well, a few things have changed
it is an ice rink.
since last we talked. Just to refresh on last time, we were basically busted one of those panels.
There's a few more holes.
There's a few more holes, so things got worse, as predicted,
Yeah.
they would. But essentially, the entire tent is now damaged. Moving it from what was not really an insurance option, or at least they were only going to pay for the one damaged panel. Now the whole thing's damaged. Changes the economics of it. So essentially, we have $1,000 deductible. We're looking at $150,000+ repair, which is now legitimate. It was not a future thing. It happened.
Yeah.
So currently, we're working with FEMA, although it looks like they may only, they've kind of changed their rules. They might just want to pay for the deductible and not.
I was just gonna say.
Can't double dip. That's one of the frustrating things.
You could have made money.
Yeah, well, in the long term, if there is a way for us to, the town and the county are self-insured. And the reality is when you talk about, you can do some sort of hybrid thing where we are insuring our vehicles and our HR liabilities through insurance. And we insure our facilities self-insured by maybe piggybacking on either the town or the county contract, recognizing that if there is an event here that burns down the fire station, most likely FEMA is going to be paying for it. So the beauty for the town is they're currently having all these things paid for. Ours, we will go through insurance, and so is the water district. The negative to that is you will see an impact on the rates, obviously.
But yeah, so the big change is instead of us just paying for it, moving towards having insurance take care of it. Also looking into having a contractor do the entire thing and not be our project, which is, if it's gonna be covered entirely by
Not a
insurance.
volunteer.
On a volunteer, let's bust our butts, try to save $1, let's get it done.
Yeah.
So that's where we're on that.
We were gonna replace all the panels anyway, right? Not just the damaged ones.
Correct. Not the ends, just the,
Yeah.
just the roof.
Okay.
Roof and sides. And yeah, so we're moving forward with that. And then I guess the second item on there was driver operator. So the 2 weeks of training coming up. Whoever operator 1A, 1B will have here, it's 2 40-hour classes. And just an update.
That's you signed up for
Yeah, come on. Come on in. So,
You taught me.
that. Yeah.
it's an official state class, so everybody takes to get their certifications and stuff. We need the people. It's gonna be a long couple weeks.
And Chief, you've got an update on the cellular tower.
I'll try to make these all pretty brief. So in the middle of the emergency, cell towers magically work themselves out to a certain extent. The AT&T.
Never let a good crisis go to waste, right?
I think we worked out a pretty good site plan with Chief Walker as far as what that would look like. So it's an impact operation, which is basically the pole by itself in the back, trenching to our landscaping area, and placing the AT&T there. In the meantime, Verizon reached out to me and I like, look, we're not putting 2 towers on, figure out a way to play nice. At first they said no, and then eventually came back and said yes. So there is a tentative agreement by Verizon to place themselves below AT&T on the tower. First they wanted to add 100 feet, so there's no way that's gonna pass. So here's what you get, and you can work with, and they're like, okay, fine.
So we're still at 80.
So we're still at 80 feet, which is kind of what we believe was kind of the most reasonable for putting it out there. The big difference for me is I can truly call this a public safety project in the sense that I had concerns if it was just AT&T, it doesn't trigger Verizon. You still have T-Mobile.
By the way, it's a priority for the town and for MLT. and
It is.
Gas services.
Yeah, and I spoke with Dan Holler about that. My take is, I don't know if I want John already standing next to me.
No. I would
Yes,
do that
so,
alone.
and that's where I do believe that, as a public safety project, this moves forward. We've also, we went back to AT&T and asked for, significantly more than they had initially offered us. We're also gonna ask Verizon to put in for a piece of that. It won't be the same, but we're looking at, potentially 60,000 a year, which we are committing the land for 25 years. So that is a big commitment on our side. That being said, it is, over $1 million that we get back. So it ends up being about
150 square feet.
it ends up being about
Manhattan, probably.
planner, yeah.
It's both those little plots are gonna be 10 by 20.
Yeah, 10 by 20 in the planner. So we're losing land that we weren't using it. And,
But
I mean, the biggest.
literally weeds and
Yeah.
I was gonna say, so, okay, I
Yeah.
was off, 200 square feet.
And you're taking a little bit of a hit with that, Chuck. Some people that obviously support it because they want the cell services, some people are not gonna be super excited about it. So that being said, we're close on the contract. We had a special consultant attorney working on it to make sure we do that right. That piece is almost there. We've got tentative agreement on the site, what everything looks like. So the next step would be, we want to make sure it doesn't look like the district just kind of trying to slide this in around something. So my intent would be to attend a couple town council meetings, just to let them know we'll have a public hearing, most likely at the next board meeting. And then I would have one more, so people really have a chance to come and speak on this. So we'd be looking at.
we're gonna have guests.
Yeah, somebody might actually.
Well, but you also, though, you all have done a lot of work on this. You raised a pole, you raised the engine over there, you got flags up there, and you have pictures of what it looks like and what it's not gonna look like. Because I think that, in people's eyes, it's like, oh my God, it's gonna be, the Twin Towers and it's blocking my view. There's no view, right? I mean, you're not infringing other than the.
I mean, the people that are gonna complain the most are gonna be at Snow Creek.
4.
No, 7.
It's rather than 1.
Where they're.
Well, they built right up next to me anyway.
Yeah.
This is like people who buy land under an airport landing zone and then complain about the noise.
And the compromise is we're gonna move that chairlift tower that's currently there, so this will be taller than that chairlift tower. I spoke with Sandra about this a little bit from town planning. She recommends we get some flyers out to kind of the local community, so there'll be a couple next steps, with the intent being this comes before our board, May and June. If the board decides to move forward on it, then it goes to planning pretty quickly after that. Planning has essentially said that, they're gonna be supporting our board, we need to make sure we do public outreach.
Bells and
And at that point, they could potentially be putting this thing in relatively quickly. I know they would like to see it this fall. Yeah, so.
Good.
If I just
The
move
audit?
through, yeah, the
Yeah,
audit.
just go
So,
ahead.
we actually received our draft audit back from Don Cole, who's been our auditor for the last few years. Everything looks good. I just haven't had a chance to do the management discussion and analysis piece, so that's on me to get back. What I also want to do is, we now have, we should start taking some of these opportunities where we had this discussion with the board previously, where we saved some money on the station, and then that money just gets funneled in and it gets used up. I believe that taking a look at the end of the year with where we ended up with last year's money, we should take that and put that somewhere so that we're in good financial shape, especially over these next few years, as kind of seeing what the economics does, if we do hire more people down the line, and a couple of things are taken care of. So there's a couple of recommendations on right now for that. One, for example, is capital expenditures. We're putting about $250 away right now, which is honestly short. I did some analysis on that, and then Chief Brooks did some independently of me. We both came up with about the same number. So I think that when I bring the audit, I'm also going to bring some recommendations on where we put that and create kind of a more across the year how we're looking at our budget and where we're putting some things away on certain funds.
Yeah, I mean, because just, it was my concern early on that once we stopped paying rent, and we took our reserves to zero, basically, paid for the facility, that we take that money that we're paying in rent and start rebolstering the reserves. Those fundamentally, fears realized, just got flushed into operations. Theoretically.
Yeah, and I would say, again, there's a couple of things that happen there, but I agree conceptually on that. Because the other part of it is, we also have that story to tell when people come back and like, yeah, $5 million sitting in the bank. It's like, well, we do, but we also have these OPEB obligations we have to have export. We have to have a capital expenditure fund. We have to have a housing. We have to have a little bit in all these buckets. And then you're not just sitting there with a giant pot of money. You explain to people what it is you're doing. And the reality is, every other public organization here does that. We, again, are just so short on staff. We haven't had the capacity to get all that done. But it's important, both from good, sound financial practices as well as that messaging to the public. And when you go out for things like bond measures, they look for these things, as well as fiscal policies to show that you are a good steward of money. So that's. Do you mind if I just keep going on these? Or?
No,
Okay.
please.
So Wood Innovations Grant Program, that's what I was mentioning with the biomass facility. Again, that's going to be a huge project for this community in the sense that we're already discussing chipping. There's going to be a lot of chipping this summer. And the reality is there is no more transfer station. So where we used to take it, now you're theoretically going to have to take it to maybe dumpster wars or drive it to de-mining. So our short-term chipping impacts are going to be one thing. And that's without even the work that White Park is attempting to do, with Janet Hatfield's team. So we were helping them out with this process. There was a couple of things that we do kind of in the middle of March. We ended up not being able to support them, but fortunately, Janet was able to find some additional funding, and they were able to handle this on the county and the White Park side. So that moved forward without the district's involvement. It's a key piece for keeping the community safe long term, because we do have to figure out where to put all this biomass. Unfortunately, it's moving on.
We did give them your letter of support, though.
We did give them a letter of support, yeah. So I did.
Greg Cook, GC Forest Products, was telling me that they used to charge him like $10 or $15 a truckload to take the bark waste from the station. That's $900 now.
Oh, so we gave him a letter of support as well, and he actually received a smaller, essentially, furnace that he can use. So he's going to start using what he has and creating energy off of it. So the problem with Greg Cook's solution is it's very small and big scheme of things, but kind of the bigger analysis.
When he said in the summertime, he sends 3 trucks a week down
to
the, and he goes, I can't run that.
So there's room for both now. He's going to get his project moving forward, and there's still hopefully a larger one as well.
With our chips in?
To him, potentially. Yeah. But I don't know if he's got it built yet. Oh, wildland program update, I probably did a little bit of that when we were discussing the budget. Again, the intent is that they start up in about a week and a half here. We're looking for the 2 agent bosses to be our most experienced wildland people, and I expect the 4 other people to be relatively new and green in the wildland sense. But we're gonna have them on for 7 months most likely, so we'll have some staffing. And we're gonna have them out of station 2, Roger, just to have
There you go.
someone out there, so, baby steps, incremental moves
Yeah.
towards what that looks like, but tentatively pretty excited about that, and just getting some fresh blood and getting people. We certainly can use the help, especially right now, because our full-time staff is so short. We do plan on rebuilding that, but it's just getting the job descriptions and all of this laid out has been a handful in your food emergency. Any other questions on wildland?
Okay, board member comments, anybody?
I would just add, and Tyson, this is for you and the association in particular, but again, thanks so much for everything you all have done for the community over this last, seems like forever, but 4 months.
Really,
5 months,
really.
yeah. Please convey, Alex, to you and all the other chiefs, but also to the association members that we're just exceedingly proud of everything that you all stepped up and did. That's above and beyond that. So I know that in good times, we're usually overpaid, and in bad times, we're wildly underpaid. But we appreciate it.
Yeah,
Those without saying, yes.
and that new class that you put through, Tyson, they had a baptism in fire. Wow,
They're all spoiled.
yeah.
Like, wow, this is awesome.
This is real.
You didn't have anybody back in?
No,
No.
Mm.
Oh, good, that's great.
no, all the new members have been quite, still signing up for shifts and showing up, and you always have a few that get through and are busy with other stuff in life and get their other jobs. They're very good work too, so.
Yeah.
But we definitely still have those big groups and a couple that are really made
Well, that's such a big
probably more
deal.
money than some of the chiefs because of all the calls they made, but but yeah, they've been really good. So thank you. We appreciate that, and I'll get that to
Yeah. And the big thing is that you let things slide personally in order to protect the community.
Yeah.
You're out there doing that, and if there's anything we can do to help, in the summertime here with guys that had major problems with their houses or something like that. If the board can do anything to help with that.
Yeah.
We want to know.
Careful, Roger, I have some windows in there.
Yeah.
And Roger now knows CV joints in and out, so.
There you go.
Yeah, and I'm all about plastic glue and we can put you back together. Legal counsel advice, they just said, don't do what we're doing, so we'll keep going. The association got any comments?
From the association side, not a lot, just for now that we're getting back into more normal kind of operations around here. Hopefully we can start to get more into talks about getting to our MOE negotiations and starting to involve those forward. So at least we have something before our contract is up in June, or at least some new letters to put in so we can keep moving, hopefully not make back paying and all that stuff kind of out there once we get.
Take heart, the last one, what was a year and a half before we got to it?
Yeah. So hopefully we can keep negotiations moving forward with that. That's about it.
Any announcements?
So Rob Witherall's retiring on Thursday, and so we're gonna have a little get together on, at the bowling alley. Normally we get training night, so.
On Thursday?
Yeah, Thursday night, 6 o'clock. You guys
Okay.
are obviously all welcome to,
Good.
cheer him on.
Family as well.
Go out there in your shoes and a clean bowling shirt.
Hate to see Rob go. That's,
We also, Judy Markham organized a going away gift that won't get to him right when he retires, but hopefully it'll get sent out afterwards. She's putting together a big quilt, so I have the patches. So if anybody would like to write some, best wishes on the patches or
Yeah.
Alish's kids decorated one beautifully, but we're not all artists.
Yeah.
And then Rob was 1 year short. It's actually not fair because we don't give you credits. Because the Christmas party is in December and you start your rookie year in February, you don't get credit for that first year, but he got 14 years. And it's 15 years for a helmet. So we got him the helmet. If you all would have signed it for the today, I'll just have everybody sign that.
Perfect.
I talked to him last night, he's looking forward to it.
Our chassis finally showed up with the new tender, so it's finally starting to be assembled.
Is that the Ford that was ordered 2 years ago? Or whatever?
This is a Freightliner.
Freightliner.
But yes,
Yeah. Well, if you need somebody getting on underneath it to work on the axles or anything.
Don't call, don't give him a radio.
Okay, Caroline.
Just an unofficial vote. Let's just, either which meeting is better or which is worse. How many can attend May 16th?
I guess my ask on this is the 23rd would be better if we can do it, just because I've got a couple more MOU items that we're.
I'm out of town the 16th anyway, but
I would vote for the 23rd also.
How many can come to the 23rd? Can all of you attend tentatively? Okay, then I will send out a meeting request. For the 23rd.
Anything else?
We do have one more thing. We did this kind of unofficially with Commissioner Truax. But since this is her first meeting, I think most of you guys, I don't know if all of you got a, but yeah, we will be giving her commissioner badge and we'll do her oath of office today, so.
Great.
she gets to get her ID.
She's official now.
Ah,
Okay. Oath of office. Raise your right hand. I state your name.
I, Elizabeth Truax,
You solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend
that I will support and defend
the Constitution of the United States
the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California
and the Constitution of the State of California
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
foreign and domestic,
foreign and domestic,
that I will bear truth and allegiance
that I will bear truth and allegiance
to the Constitution of the United States
to the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of California,
and the Constitution of the State of California,
that I take this obligation freely
that I take this obligation freely
without mental reservation
without mental reservation
or purpose of evasion,
or purpose of evasion,
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties
upon which I am about to enter.
upon which I am about to enter.
Congratulations.
Anything about pro?
Yeah.
We are then officially adjourned.
Adjourned. Okay, Jeff has not stopped the recording, so we will give him 10 seconds to walk into his office.
The day you started, he's like, when do you get badge?
Here it is.
At least we got you a jacket.
Yeah.
What's like, I was going through, I had it in my briefcase. I got this little stuff.
Yep.
Put it in the airport scanner. Going through there. And the guy